The very first console RPG was Dragon.
Stomper for the Atari 2600, released in 1982.
But the very first console JRPG
was probably the Black Onyx, which was a PC game but was ported to the MSX in 1985.
However, the most influential console JRPG, which established many of the tropes and standards of the genre, was Dragon Quest.
Developed by Chunsoft and published by NX, it was originally released for the NES in May 1986. Since then, there have been several ports and remakes on the MSX, MSX2, SNES, Game Boy Color, Wii, iOS, Android, PS4, 3DS, and Switch. Not to mention sequels, spin-offs, novels, manga, anime, and audio dramas. I've formatted this video to be a review / walkthrough / commentary mutant hybrid. I wanted this to serve as a recommendation to those who may enjoy JRPGs, but who may be wary of playing an over 3-decade-old game. My suggestion for the version to play would be the mobile port due to the price, ease of access, and updates to gameplay and dialogue. I'm using footage from the fan-translated SNES remake because of my love for 16-bit graphics, and it was also the easiest way to capture footage. It feels odd giving a spoiler warning for a game this old, but here we are. Let's begin our adventure. Naming our hero takes me way too embarrassingly long to think of one, so I'd look up the wiki and went with Aleph, from the Japanese CD drama and novelization. We appear in the company of the King of Alefgard, who tells us we're a descendant of the warrior Loto, or Erdrick in English localization. Our ancestor once had a godly ball of light that cleared the demons from the lands, but now it's been stolen by the Dragon Lord, and monsters roam the kingdom once more. Obviously, the objective is to retrieve the orb and defeat the Dragon Lord, and that'll be it for the plot exposition until the end of the game. For my journey, the king offers 120 gold, which I can barely buy anything with, 1 torch, that is a one-use item, 1 magic key, another one-use item that we need to dispose of to get past the first locked door in order to leave the first room of the game. How generous. In fairness, it demonstrates the magic key mechanic before getting to the bottom floor, where we can spot other locked doors. But let's heed the king's advice. As with all classic JRPGs, it's best to talk to every single NPC for clues on where to go next, or, make the attempt. One of the servants requests that we save the princess, who has been captured by the Dragon Lord. The king hadn't brought her up, which could be considered characterization. He may have chosen not to, because he prioritized the kingdom's people over one life, even if it was his own daughter. Or perhaps, he's just a cheap codger that only gave us 120 gold to save the continent. Back to that NPC dialogue. Some might be just flavor text, some more useful like how to save or how to use a torch, and others reference events that won't be paid off until hours later on. Pro tip. Absolutely do not forget the RPG custom of stealing everything not nailed to the ground. Upon leaving the castle, the game immediately opens up, so we need to find the Dragon Lord first before we can defeat him. While there is an ideal order to traverse the world, figuring out how is part of the experience. For example, we could head right into the wilderness and get smacked up by slimes, or head to the neighboring town just northeast to collect information and equipment. An argument might be that some players may want to just complete the game with as little stumbling around as possible, but I would recommend against it. For a few reasons. Firstly, engagement is predicated on the player interacting with the townspeople, specifically acting as an investigator. getting tips from the villagers, and following up those leads to gather items, equipment, or even more information. But at the same time, we're fed the lore and character of the citizens, town, and world. Secondly, while the amount of grinding required has been diminished on the SNES version and subsequent remakes, it is still a requirement to accumulate enough experience and cash by the endgame. A player's first blind run is likely to be their longest due to them not using the most optimal route. Thus, they will incidentally end up grinding quite a bit. In a scenario where a player knew exactly where to go, it wouldn't be shocking to run into a frustrating situation where they hit a wall of difficulty because they're under-leveled or they're low on gold. My playthrough sort of exemplifies this, as I constantly don't have enough cash for weapons and armor. Thirdly, the average run with all playstyles is around 10 hours, according to how long to beat. However, if we exclude the original NES version, that contains most of the grind, the average drops to just over 8 hours. Either way, not particularly long compared to contemporary JRPGs, so sit back, relax, and take your time. Now let's leave Ratatome Castle, or Breckenary Castle, or Tantegel Castle, and head to the neighboring town of Ratatome, or Breckenary, or Tantegel. I decide to head to the shop, and since I'm far more of a defensive player, I pick up the leather shield to cower behind. Worth noting that your inventory is limited to 10 slots, and yes, that does include equipment. At least herbs and keys stack up to 6, and items can also be stored in a bank in town. Though I wouldn't worry about inventory management this early on. Let's get chatting with the townspeople. We get a tip that some town somewhere sells magic keys. We'll just need to keep that in our back pocket for now, though. On a more interesting note, this old man says he'll help us out if we ever get cursed. Hope we won't need that. On a more humorous note, if you talk to this girl, she'll hit on you and start following you around town until you leave. Another funny thing to mention, we can actually see the Dragon Lord's castle on an island nearby. Of course, the king couldn't even give us enough gold to buy a sword, so we can forget about asking for a boat. Gonna have to figure out another way there. After fooling around, we learn from a soldier about a legendary musician, Gurai. Wouldn't you know it, a merchant claims to be from a town northwest of here, also named Gurai. What are the odds? So time to stop delaying the inevitable, pick up some medical herbs, and head out into the wilds. It's my first confrontation. Lucky me, it's a regular old slime. Perfect time to discuss combat. Every battle in the game is one-on-one. My options are use melee attacks with or without a weapon, use spells to heal or attack, use support items such as herbs, or flee. And that's it. But hey, it was the 80s, man, when that's all you needed.
I was just making a call.
I haven't learned any spells yet, so let's just wail on the thing with my fists. How heroic. Fortunately, the slime couldn't even land a hit on me, and it's effortlessly vanquished. Unfortunately, shortly after I run into a ghost that turns the tables and almost obliterates me, but I managed to successfully flee. Whew. Then I run into another ghost and have to try 3 times before I'm able to escape. Already off to a rocky start. In hindsight, I should have picked any weapon over the shield. Along the way to Gurai, I enter combat with a Drakey, which I'm actually able to deal damage to, so things are looking up. Finally made it to town, and we're greeted with a minstrel offering a song. Can I just say, his family and friends should be ashamed of themselves for not telling him how awful and embarrassing he is. But the disappointment continues because the town isn't that big and I'm strapped for cash, so we can just forget about buying a weapon. On the brighter side, the tomb of our ancestors is just east of here, so hopefully there's a weapon lying around there, right? The vibe from the town is very quaint, and the townspeople seem to really admire the founder, the legendary minstrel, Gurai. We learn more about the princess subquest. Some sort of flying creature kidnapped her and headed east as well. It's also worth noting that for the most part, a guide is unnecessary, as you can figure out the next steps even if you're only half paying attention. But that comes with a few asterisks. Side note, I found this exchange to be funny, but maybe that's just me. Let's make our way east on that tip about our ancestor. Along the way, we get our first level up. Don't expect much, as it's done automatically, so there's no room for customizing stats. While it's kind of expected of a game this old, at the very least I found the difficulty was balanced for this linear character build, and each level up can have appreciable effects. Obvious things like hitting significantly harder and missing a lot less, but we'll also see useful spells unlock later on. I enter the tomb and become completely enveloped in darkness. Time to light up. The torch gives me enough light to navigate, but not necessarily enough to avoid dead ends. As I make my way through the cave, I become more apprehensive of being attacked by a monster. The ominous music certainly didn't help. However, I managed to make it to the tomb without incident. Reading the etchings on the headstone, it seems our ancestor was a fortune teller because he wrote the message specifically for his descendant, noting that if we wanted to make it to the Dragon Lord's Island, we'll need to meet the descendants of 3 wise men that were each entrusted with an important item. I can't help but ponder, if he knew that much, he couldn't be bothered to leave me an armor set or a weapon behind, preferably labeling his name on it. It's also not clear how holding 3 items would help me make it across the water. Unless, of course, it was a sacred wooden boat and 2 paddles. Time to head back to home base. On the way there, we made it to level 3, earning our first spell, Heal, which is great, except with the amount of MP available now, I'll only be able to cast it once. If you head back to the castle, you can get your MP recharged by this old sage for free, but he refuses to heal your wounds. It would just be a minor inconvenience to heal yourself, however, every time he recharges your MP, he makes an attempt to give you a seizure. We can finally take on the ghosts confidently, so I decide to grind a bit by making my way back to Garai. Even with that, we still can't afford a club, so I cut my losses and decide to continue our journey eastward, recalling what that guy said about the princess and the monster, making it to level 4 along the way and gaining the Fireball spell, or as it's referred to as, Hurt, or Sizz, or Frizz in the newer games. Regardless, it's a game changer, a reliable, powerful attack spell for the early game. Regrettably, I run into a Magidrake who casts a fireball that deals devastating damage. With that, I receive my first death. Instead of being brought back to the title screen, I'm dragged back to the king. He lets me know what a great person he is for giving me another chance. Yeah, sorry for dying for the sake of the whole kingdom. Why doesn't he try reviving from the dead? By the way, he also forgets to mention that half your gold gets taken away. I suppose it's a better penalty than losing your progress and literally wasting your time, because you still keep your XP and items. Good time to bring up that the king can let you know how much experience you'll need to your next level and save your game. He is also the only one who can record your file, meaning no matter where you are in the overworld, you're gonna have to trek back to the castle to save. So it's a good idea to have at least one Chimera wing on you at all times. Heading east, I run into the Magidrake again and get some sweet revenge by casting a fireball at it, killing it with 1 hit. One step into Myra, and already I gotta compliment its personality. It was a great idea to have a theme for a town surrounded by trees that would not only have a bunch of them within, but is covered under the shades of taller trees. It was also pretty large and has a bathhouse where I felt like a strip mall in comparison, and not a lot going on design-wise either, except for that large wall. Wonder what that was about. Regardless, I find my first set of free armor, plain clothes, along with a strength seed. You find a seed, you should always pop it as soon as you can, as they boost a specific stat and otherwise take up a slot in your inventory. Time to mingle with the townsfolk. We get another tip about magic keys. The town's gossip mentions that this guy ditched his wife to go buy some, which was morbidly hilarious because what use do these keys have beyond the protagonists? It almost sounded like he had an addiction. Admittedly, what's not as funny is his wife fully accepting his decision, stating sadly that she doesn't want to burden him. We're gonna shuffle away from this awkward situation. A soldier gives us the lead on the magic keys, saying they're sold in a town south of here called Rimeldar. This old guy can only be reached by stepping on these poisonous floor tiles, so you'd think he'd have something really important to say, right? So get this, apparently, our ancestor's sword is somewhere on the continent. All I have to say is, S-class trolling right there. Noteworthy, one of the townspeople mentions some woman in a cave south of here, whatever that's about. Unprompted, a soldier suggests that playing the flute is the key weakness to the golems. What flute? What golem? You okay, bro? As exciting as it was to reach a new town, some things remain the same, such as not having enough gold to buy anything. I end up doing a few laps around town. I would have suggested saving your fireball for the gold scorpions, as they are pretty tough and drop the most gold of any monsters so far. However, the Magidrakes and mages can cast fireballs, and we already learned how devastating those are. So just let your inner pyromaniac burn freely. Besides, we can stay at the inn to restore MP. In less than 5 minutes, I was able to rack up 2 levels. So to celebrate, I finally buy our first weapon of the game, a copper sword. It only took me 45 minutes to get to this point. I'm feeling really confident now, so let's take our next step in our adventure and head south to Rimuldar. Immediately hitting a cave, another compliment to toss out to this game, they set up the torch mechanic early at the tomb, which was a safe environment. Now we'll need to navigate the maze while taking on monsters. Don't be too intimidated though, as it contains a lot of familiar foes with few exceptions, and it's by no means challenging to navigate. We hit a locked door, beyond it we can see a red carpet. We haven't gotten any magic keys yet, so we'll just need to leave it at that for now. After a few more battles, we hit level 7, earning the sleep spell, which will have its situation-specific uses. As for getting out of the cave, it's not too surprising to find the exit on the southernmost section. Unfortunately, the monsters past the cave are far tougher, such as wizards, wolves, and skeletons, so let's flee as much as possible and rush to Rimuldar. Of course, there's only one way to access it, and of course, it had to be on the opposite side of the path we came from. This place may seem unassuming. Appearance-wise, nothing special that we haven't seen before. However, it will offer plenty of objectives and key items. Let's get the shopping, chatting, and larceny over with first. Much like the other towns before, the shops come with stronger weapons and armor. We meet the husband that left to go buy magic keys. However, along the way he got robbed by monsters. They even took the shirt off his back, and he can no longer return home. Anyway, for once, someone has a realistic response to a stranger in their home. The mood among some of the town is dreadful. Makes sense, being so close to the Dragonlord's island. A couple of citizens mentions monoliths too. A soldier will let us know about one near Myra. A fortune teller says it's best to head further south to visit another one. We learn that our ancestor was able to use a magical bridge to make it to the Dragonlord's island. So presumably these items that were held by the wise men will help us conjure it. You know, he could have been more clear about that. But what about the shop selling magic keys? Even the citizens don't seem to know the exact location, although there is a building in the northwest corner. There doesn't seem to be a way to access it. Well, there is a clue east of here. We'll see a girl on the other side of the river, but the game doesn't make it apparent how to reach her. Here's the deal. Crossing the other side of the entrance bridge will not kick you out of the map. You'll be able to walk north and speak with the girl. She mentions she's waiting for her boyfriend. If you head to the southwest corner, you can let the boy know and he'll realize he's at the wrong meeting spot. As thanks, he'll tell us we can pick up an item by walking 4 paces south of the bathhouse in Myra. Now let's head to that northwest building. Unsurprisingly, it's the shop that sells magic keys. How he can maintain a business that is difficult for people to find, we never know. So, we've been given a few objectives. Firstly, backtrack to unlock doors. Secondly, visiting the monoliths. Thirdly, grab that item the boy mentioned. I choose to grind for a couple minutes, grabbing enough experience to make it to level 8. Let's head back to Myra as it relates to all 3 objectives. We make our way to the monolith. An old man stands in front of a chest. He says he wants to test our strength by retrieving a silver harp. In exchange, he'll offer us the Staff of Rain. No hints were given on where to find a harp, but we do know of a town with an appreciation for music. I think it should be clear by now the monoliths are where we'll find the descendants of the 3 wise men and their heirlooms. Back in town, I did as the boy suggested and picked up the fairy flute. But just how did he know about it? Using the magic keys, we can speak to this sage who just happens to be the father of the boy who gave us that hint. He tells us to travel to a town named Melkido and try using the flute there. To be honest, it's just as unclear why such an important item was buried there, though. Not necessarily had to build a monolith and guard it in a chest, but, could have kept it in a drawer or something. We're pretty much done here, so let's Chimera wing our way back to the castle. Through the first locked door, the soldier will state, "A true hero will never steal." Whatever, I pilfered through those chests without a second thought. Managed to nab agility and magic seeds, another magic key, and a bag of cash. Totally worth it. The second door gets us access to another magic key shop and a healing priest. You'll notice these odd tiles. Stepping on them does more damage than poisonous ones, although if you make it to the other side, a soldier will let us know that we are ready to take on the monsters found in the Grave of Grai. Lastly, we are told about a secret underground chamber, which should remind you of the secret shop in Rimmeldar. They even plant a similar looking girl as a hint. We meet one of the descendants, and we claim our first key item, the Stones of Sunlight, giving this poor guy a break from spending his life protecting this heirloom. Don't forget to steal his shit. We can grab a nut of life from his drawer. Oh my. It is worth mentioning that making it this far, you should be able to tackle an optional dungeon, the mountain cave located south of Grai past a bridge. Regrettably, this isn't what I did. Let's see how that turned out, eh? Head to the locked building in Grai. No surprise, it seems like everyone is completely ignorant of the exact location of the grave. Well, this is a more obtuse clue, but there isn't a back wall. You'll just need to press against it till you find an opening. Figured this had to be the case after searching throughout the town. I could only think, where else could the entrance be? This is admittedly one of the game's lesser moments, as the only clue we're given is to search on our own. An old man gives us a warning about challenging the monsters in the grave, then dissipates. Okay. You'll need a torch to guide yourself around. Another compliment to the game. We've gotten an escalation of these underground caves, one in a safe environment, and one through a fairly simple map, not much more intricate than a couple of dark hallways. But this is a huge leap with a complex 4-floor map, which could be considered the first mandatory dungeon of the game. My only strategy was to hug the left wall until I made it to the northeast corner, managing to nab a life seed, cash, and a spare magic key, which I believe was by design because when we finally reach the critical pathway, it's blocked by a locked door, making the key absolutely necessary. Because if a player only had one key and used it to open the main entryway, they'd be stuck at this door. It would be really bothersome if they were forced to backtrack to Rimmeldar for more keys, so let this serve as a warning. The second basement floor is a tad intricate as it introduces several staircases, so a little trial and error will be required. While most of the monsters are around the same levels as the ones I faced on the world map, by the time I hit the third floor, the new wolf and snail variants completely outclass me and start kicking my ass. I'm just rushing and fleeing on my way to the harp. In the back of my mind, I was just thinking, I really don't want to backtrack and buy more keys and torches. Though it ends up costing me more because my luck runs out and I get done in by a wolf. Funnily enough, I didn't realize it at the time, I made it to level 9, gaining the Radiant spell, which acts as a torch, except it starts with a larger circumference, which slowly dims over time. Even with that minor drawback, it's worth it to create more space in my inventory. Only issue now is relying on the fireball, sucks up a lot of my MP. After the king's customary condescending speech is over, we head back to Rimmeldar, grinding for just enough to purchase a steel sword. The damage output is on par with the fireball, which we can now retire. Since Grave of Grai seems to be a bit tough for us at the moment, it's best to focus on another objective. Might as well work our way to the southern monolith, since I've already visited the one near Myra. Along the way, I encounter a gold golem. I know what it says. It's a gold golem. So I attempt, in vain, to play the fairy flute. And he responds to my performance by punching the flute down my throat. I'll have to track back to Rimmeldar. Actual helpful advice would be to pull out the sleep spell we learned a while ago, knocking him out for a few turns, and getting some free hits in. Then just rinse and repeat. You do not want to be hit by this guy. As his name implies, he'll drop a substantial amount of gold, but with a trade-off of a measly sum of experience. but it's just enough for level 10 gaining the stop spell, which as you'd imagine, stops enemy spells. In a moment that's both hilarious and frustrating, I make it to the front door of the monolith just to be attacked by Chimera, just to be killed. Making my way back again, nope, dodging that, and making it to the interior of the building this time, the Descendant asks for proof of our lineage, then immediately kicks us out to the world map. For a fortune teller, you could have expanded on those details. While seeing as the only goal left is obtaining the harp, better pick up some herbs and keys and give Gorai another visit. As challenging as the 3rd and 4th floors were before, this isn't the case now, as we've gained a couple of levels, the steel sword, and use of the stop spell to prevent mage-type monsters from attacking and the beast-type monsters from healing. As far as navigating the dungeon goes, if you either draw out a map literally or mentally, you'll find you'll need access to a section of the 3rd basement floor by first heading to the 4th floor. This will lead to a set of stairs back up to a room that contains the silver harp. I think that's worth celebrating, so I snatch up enough gold for the steel armor. We'll skip ahead to delivering the silver harp to the Descendant near Myra, acquiring the Rain Cloud Staff. So now is where we hit a sort of metaphorical wall, because heading back to the southern monolith, even with 2 essential items in hand, that crotchety old man will still throw us out. With that being the case, I decide to grind for a few minutes, making it to level 12, learning the spell Outside, used for escaping any dungeon. At this point, it wasn't clear what the next objective was, noting that I completely forgot about the locked door between Myra and Rimeldar. We have mentions of 2 towns, Melchido and Domdora, but no mentions of where they might be. Now, there is an obvious point to be made. There is a whole other part of the continent to explore south of Gorai. This is easily found by just spending enough time on the world map. However, I would want to point out that the game was doing a good job so far of feeding the player enough information to guide them to their next location. My complaint with this is not necessarily that the game didn't make it easy for players. They could have certainly offered more obtuse clues. Regardless, my issue is that it was rewarding the players for role-playing by engaging the citizens and picking up their leads, but that's completely dropped in favor of just unmotivated wandering across the world until you just happen to find the next town by accident. What's going on in the context of the game other than our hero just praying to find something? Let's head to the mountain cave that I mentioned you should absolutely have already visited before Grave of Gorai. If you've learned the spell Radiant, don't forget to dump all your torches as they're just wasting valuable inventory space. Considering I was already at level 12, and with my current equipment, I demolished every single monster I came across. After a bit of surveying, you'll find chests containing gold, magic and strength seeds, a warrior's ring, and a cursed necklace. I attempt to discard it but accidentally equip it instead. Now we're cursed and it can't be removed. Also, I missed out on a shield. So that happened. If you attempt to enter the castle, you'll be thrown out for being cursed, meaning you can't save. Yikes. Remember that town near the castle called Ratatome, or Tantagal, or whatever? Well, regardless, remember the old man who said he could remove curses? Yeah, well, get him to remove the cursed necklace that you were stupid enough to equip in the first place. My strategy now was to head to Rimeldar to hunt for some gold golems to eventually earn enough for magic armor, which has the exact same physical defense as the steel armor. However, magic damage is greatly reduced by 1/3 from what I've looked up. Also made it to level 13, earning the return spell, which effectively replaces the Chimera Wing. The Warrior's Ring is not the proof of lineage needed for the monolith either, by the way. But hey, I thought my ancestor was a warrior, right? Maybe a stretch. It finally clicked that I forgot about the locked door in the underground crossing, coming face to face with a dragon guarding the princess. I contemplated leaving a couple of times before saying screw it. Turned out that was the right decision to make, as the steel sword does enough damage and I only used spells for healing. We escort the princess back to the castle, literally carrying her there. On top of that, if you speak with the NPCs, we're offered unique dialogue. We reunite her with her father, and an awkward question is asked. Does she ask you if you fantasize about her? Like, really? Even in front of her dad? She also offers you an item, Princess Love. When used, it will state the distance between us and the princess. While that might be sentimental to our hero, what use is this schmaltzy declaration of love for us, the players? We'll need to wait on that for a bit. We're back to just picking a direction and hoping we find a town. That does happen in a sense. There is this decimated place with nothing of interest by the looks of it. So let's be more specific with our hopes and pray we find a town with people and shops and not dilapidated. Along the way, there were some tough opponents where slapping them with your sword isn't going to cut it. It becomes more important than ever to cast Sleep on beast-type monsters and Stop Spell on mage types. Just as we're about to make it to Melkido, we're confronted by a dragon, which looks an awful lot like the one we defeated. Well, I've leveled up to 14 at this point, and we're able to crush it even faster. With its placement, it may appear like it's blocking our way into town. Well, I take one step forward, coming face to face with the one and only Golem. Except for all the other gold ones that kind of take the hype out of the fight. Regardless, hope you brought your fairy flute. Using it will knock out the Golem, which makes this battle a breeze. Let's enter Melkido and do all the stuff we do. Speaking with some citizens, we get the idea that the Dragon Lord is dangerous if the continent covered in demons and destruction didn't make that clear enough for you. The design of the town as a fortress was done with purpose as one describes the possibility of an attack. This is perfectly reasonable considering the state of their closest neighbor. More lore is given about our ancestor as he's described as falling from the sky as a gift from the gods. Now, there is another game that addresses his origins, but from this description, I believe we're meant to believe that he was an angel or a messiah. There may be a lack of story or character building in this game, but I can appreciate the effort to give this world depth by adding history to its town and world as a whole. Pertaining to our quest, we have a mention of a man named Yukhanov, who buried a treasure under a tree behind his shop. If treasure is too vague for you, speaking with one of the soldiers lets us know it's specifically our ancestors' armor. That certainly piqued my interest, but where was Yukhanov's shop? Well, give me a minute, okay? I'm trying my best. The guy's across town, for goodness sake. His grandson tells us that Yukhanov had a bustling business in Domdora, but left evading the onslaught of monsters, and yes, that was the destroyed town we passed by earlier. On another hint for a completely different object, a priest tells us to search 140 paces south and 80 paces east of Ratatomi Castle or Breckenridge Castle or whatever. This seems like a ridiculous ask. It's not as if you can walk in a straight line from the castle in either direction. However, you may recall the gift from the princess, the very one that tells us the distance between the two of you. I died. Well, since I'm forced to take the same route as last time, might as well give Domdora a visit and make an attempt to pick up the armor. At level 15, I felt uncomfortably underleveled when traversing this area. Just a reminder, if you haven't already, you really need to rely on those sleep and stop spells. It went from bad to worse when I was confronted by the Demon Knight, who knocks my ass all the way back to the castle. It's at this point I could understand the frustration due to a lack of fast travel. Also, seeing as grinding for 10 minutes only yields us one level up to 16, let's drop Domdora for now and head to our secondary objective, the hidden item. Uncovering the item shouldn't prove too hard. Just pop the Princess Love and get an idea of how close you are. Of course, it's in a poisonous swamp, but eventually we prevail. This token will be what we need to prove our lineage to that old miserable crank. Before that, we'll trek back to Melkido because I have enough cash for the flame sword. And now let's head our way to the other side of the continent. Don't forget to bring the rain staff and sunstones with you because the elderly irritable curmudgeon will ritually sacrifice them to the gods. For it, we are offered the rainbow drop that can create the bridge to the Dragon Lord's castle. So let's test it out, seeing as it's just west of Rimeldar. Also, not gonna lie, could use more space in my inventory. I don't have the best armor, and I definitely felt underleveled to take on the final dungeon. However, by digging around the castle and avoiding tougher fights, perhaps I might get my hands on better equipment. While I searched the west and east hallways, stepping over damage tiles, heading down both staircases, they lead to large, empty rooms. I feel this overwhelmingly bleak feeling that the Dragon Lord is watching and cackling at me right now, as if he had designed his dungeon to troll me specifically. I despondently zoom back to the castle and walk back to Melkido. Along the way, I hit level 17, learning a buffed up version of the heal spell, aptly named Heal More. If I'm gonna take on the Troll Lord, better grab my ancestor's armor. I take on the Demon Knight once again at Domdora. You're gonna want to use the stop spell to prevent him from using sleep, which can be devastatingly combined with his damage output. With his spells locked, just keep bashing each other's heads in until you're the only one left standing. With that, we've obtained the strongest armor in the game. Equipping it will block damage from those blue tiles and passively heal you as you walk. The armor will be useful for navigating the Dragon Lord's castle. Taking the main hall, we discover an empty throne room. Investigating the chair, it's noted that a draft can be felt from behind it. Inspecting the back, it appears there's a secret staircase heading downward. It's as if we were going to hell. The dungeon design is only slightly more complex than the mountain cave, though at the very least, the random encounters are absolutely befitting of a final dungeon. All the previous bosses become common enemies: dragons, golems, and knights. In fact, there are even stronger variants on the lower floors. Making it to the bottom, the treasure room can be easily seen. I was apprehensive at first. Playing the sequels, you'd be familiar with booby-trapped chests. But for the most part, it's all good items, such as gold, seeds, and herbs. I believe if there are any tricks to be made, it's that you can obtain the cursed belt. It's best not to equip if the name and earlier stumbles didn't make it obvious. While it can be sold for a fair bit of cash, you probably won't need it if you've made it this far. It can be reasonably assumed that you've already found or bought the best equipment, and one-use items are fairly cheap. I head back up because I had only taken the critical path to the boss, bypassing all other routes and potential treasure. In the meantime, I made it to level 19, earning the stronger fireball spell, which was great. However, moments later I discovered our ancestor's sword, which quickly replaces it. While the upgraded fireball does more damage, I didn't bother wasting MP on anything other than healing. At this point, I'm drowning in cash, equipment, and spells, so I head back out to dump and reorganize my inventory. Making my way back down, I hit level 20, standing right before the Dragon Lord's chamber, about to have our climactic confrontation. It's about this point, my footage got corrupted. Not only that, my previous save was all the way back at level 16, meaning I had to grind back to level 20, pick up all the critical items, and grab our ancestor's sword and armor again. So, why not take this time to mention metal slimes? They mostly spawn south of Domdora, and if defeated, they drop tons of experience, making those 4 levels a breeze. Of course, there is a caveat: you're not likely to actually hit them, and before you can get a chance to land an attack on them, they're likely to run away. You can forget about magic too, as they're impervious, so you're just praying to the gods of RNG to get enough attacks to kill them. Otherwise, your best chance is to save scum on your way to victory. Obviously, I don't recommend this on an average playthrough, but hey, I totally get it if you're putting a project together and you lose a bunch of footage. We're back to level 20, standing before the Dragon Lord's chamber. Again, we're about to have our climactic confrontation. Shockingly, it appears I'm still recording with no issues. The Dragon Lord introduces himself and offers us half of the world. Like I'd ever do that. Hell yeah, I would. We gift him our sword and he offers us half of the dark world. What the hell is this? In actuality, nothing happens other than being sent back to the inn, and we're told that we had a nightmare. So let's head back to the castle once again. We're still at level 20, standing before the Dragon Lord's chamber. This time, we reject his offer. With my level and best equipment in the game, he doesn't present much of a threat. He hits hard and can cast healing and sleep spells. As long as you can heal yourself every few turns, it's not much to worry about. With that, he's been defeated. Of course not. This may be an old JRPG, but it wouldn't be complete without a final boss transformation. He lives up to his namesake and transforms into a literal dragon. Our strategy hasn't changed much. Just keep your HP above 60. Seems like every other attack did above 50 damage. Though he hits stronger, he goes down again all the same. We peel the ball of light from the Dragon Lord's cold, dead fingers, becoming submerged in a bright light. And brought back to the surface with all the monsters having been vanquished. We can wander the overworld unmolested by random encounters. A neat touch is that all the poisonous tiles have been replaced by flowers. And in that moment, you can just imagine the creators wanting to make the player feel the impact they've made on this world. While making our way to the castle, let's visit the towns. For the most part, they are grateful and celebrating. But let's focus on the more interesting characters, starting with Rimmeldar. The deadbeat husband won't even realize that anything's happened till the moment you speak to him. On the brighter side, the boy apologizes to his girlfriend, and since we are true heroes and wingmen, we let her know the flute that he told us about helped us in our journey. She seems to be in a forgiving mood. If you speak to the old sage at the Southern Monolith or the priest in Melchido, they will mention the goddess Rubius, who created the continent Alefgard. This is basically just a neat reference as the character is expanded on in the next two games. Back in Grai, the minstrel's singing has improved. If you head south to Dom Dora, you can speak to the spirit of Grai himself. He'll reminisce about this town before disappearing, and the grim music will be replaced with the upbeat town theme. Heading back to the castle, we receive a hero's welcome, with all the soldiers lined up and the king awaiting our arrival. He offers us to rule the kingdom in his place, but then our hero does something truly unheard of. He speaks. The hero says that he'll establish a new country elsewhere, rather than taking over someone else's. Princess Laura will accompany us, and the soldiers play us off. As the credits roll, we can appreciate the highlight reel of our adventure. Now, it's worth mentioning there is an alternate ending if you hadn't saved the princess. Nevertheless, Dragon Quest II makes it very clear this is the canonical ending. Before playing the game, I had the impression that it would be archaic, yet I ended up thinking the game holds up in the minute-to-minute gameplay, having to manage your health, MP, gold, and items, which might seem obvious, though keep in mind that even the average monsters roaming around can deal enough damage that will stack quickly in just a few short battles. This means that your healing resources will drain just as swiftly. A player will have to consider whether it's worth finishing a dungeon or making it to the next town, or if it's better to come back after they've stocked up. Losing half your cash is certainly a lesser penalty than having to load a save file. However, I imagine most won't want it to come to that point in the first place. The game doesn't drop enough banks in the world to make it so you can always protect your money. In those situations, there may be reasons why you would want to risk your cash pool, such as a player choosing not to shop in one town and make an attempt to reach the next one to splurge on better equipment. Or in other instances, being halfway through a dungeon and pressing through to grab the key item on the final floor. With the game being so short, you're likely to feel the escalation. Each level up or new equipment creates a huge advantage. From the start, the player will barely survive against forest critters, but by the end, they'll be tackling an entire castle full of knights, mages, and dragons. A majority of hints given were not absurdly vague, with exceptions being finding Garai's tomb by pressing against the wall, or having to just wander the map for the last two towns. I think where the game stumbles the most is all the major fights. The golem is a gimmick battle with the flute knocking him out. He's completely useless. The dragon and dragon lord are just wars of attrition. The closest to a dynamic battle is fighting the demon knight. as we need to keep casting the stop spell to avoid him from casting sleep, which is more than what you have to do with the dragon bosses, and he's also not completely paralyzed like the golem. The most intense combat of the game, however, was the random encounters outside Melkido. Knowing which spells to use was essential here, which the whole game could have used more of in its entirety. Speaking of spells, the upgraded Fireball spell at level 19 was completely useless by the time I received it, as I would have imagined many players will already be tackling the final dungeon. Around that point, you may have already bought or found the best weapons. There is a level cap of 30, though I have only ever leveled up to 20 and have never had any issues with the Dragon Lord. The elements that stood out the most, though, were the NPC dialogue, lore, and town designs, giving the townspeople even just one characteristic, and each town a unique design went a long way to giving the game personality. This being a remake also gave the developers a chance to add lore that increased its connections to its direct sequels. That's about it. I very much enjoyed my experience playing Dragon Quest on multiple consoles, multiple times. I may have felt differently about the NES original, but I've never touched it and don't plan to, considering the extra grind. With the game's age and limitations, it may seem fairly simplistic, but I believe that's its charm now and even back then. As the designer and writer of Dragon Quest, Yuji Horii has admitted that he was inspired by PC games Ultima and Wizardry, however his team needed to streamline the experience for the NES, simplifying a lot of functions. The length and straightforward mechanics means it's an easy commitment, especially compared to modern JRPGs. Don't let Dragon Quest's modest charm fool you though. The game set a standard for console JRPGs of its era, launched a long-standing franchise, and inspired other enduring series. Go check it out.